Hi, I'm Charles, and I think I've spent like 5,000 hours listening to sermons, getting Bible training, and I'd like to give you the benefit of my observations after 5,000 hours of study. And that would be that all Christian ministers tell three inescapable lies. The first lie is that they understand the New Testament. This is a lie. The New Testament is so preloaded with paradoxes that it cannot be understood as written. The second big lie they tell you is that they believe in the New Testament. When they say belief, they don't mean that in the conventional sense. These are people of faith. They have faith in the New Testament, and by faith, that's a fancy word for trust. They trust the New Testament, which is a bit different than believing it. The third thing is that they can teach the New Testament to you. Well, if the New Testament cannot be understood, it cannot be taught. And you can sit there for 10,000 hours worth of instruction or 100,000. You will still not get all the pieces of the puzzle and put it all together in a coherent fashion. It will never fit together coherently because it is loaded with paradoxes. Let me give you an example. Consider the paradox that was approached by John Calvin. Imagine a group of scriptures that says that we have a free will. We choose whether or not we're going to serve God or not. Free will, kind of a staple of the Old Testament. But then Paul comes in and he starts talking about how everything's been predestined. So you have free will on one side and a lot of scriptures that support that idea. But on the other side of the argument, that is, John Calvin's argument, is that there's this whole set of scriptures on this side that say just the opposite, that say everything's been predetermined by God long beforehand. It's merely being played out. And it's the reason he had to do that is because it's a paradox. Both those ideas coexist in the New Testament. And he said, in order to be a sincere believer, a sincere lover of God, well, they can't both be right. So he said, I'm going to choose predestination. And so the Calvinist churches believe in predestination. And that other column of scriptures that talked about free will, they teach that they're sort of misunderstood. In this way, they neutralize them, or they're sort of dead, ineffective. So for them, there's this column of dead spots, this column of things that they have to dismiss, because that is the only way they can make sense of the New Testament. In fact, all the different denominations of Christianity didn't come up just because of social differences. They came up because the men studying the Bible realized that there was various conflicts all along the way. The more they studied, the more they found, the more they disagreed with one another, and the more they proliferated the variety of congregations, so that there's hundreds, thousands of different denominations, but they all spring out of these paradoxes that are all found, written into, hardwired into the New Testament. So when they say they believe in the New Testament, for instance, let's say you've wandered into a Presbyterian church. You say, do you believe in the New Testament? Can you teach me the Bible? They will say, sure. But what they're going to teach you, for instance, you might ask, I've just been reading the Gospels, and I love its message of love one another, turn the other cheek, love your enemies. And so does your church teach that? And they say, sure we do. And then you say, well, what about military service? And they say, that's fine too. Well, they're actually, when they say they believe it, they're actually believing Constantine's interpretation of the New Testament or Augustine's interpretation, which pretty much neutralizes those scriptures about loving one another and loving your enemy. They sort of talk their way around it. They've neutralized like the heart of the Sermon on the Mount. But they believe it. They have faith. But there's certain scriptures that are now dead because they had to make a choice, because there are paradoxes built in. How about the Trinity? Again, there's a series of scriptures, arguments that supports the idea of the Trinity, but there's also another column of scriptures that argues against a Trinity. Which one is right? It doesn't matter. They're both all there. They both conflict, and they can't both be right. So everyone's been forced to choose. Are they a Trinitarian church or not a Trinitarian church? When they chose, that other column of scriptures pretty much became dead. So when they say they're Trinitarians, that means they agree with the Catholic popes. That's where that idea got institutionalized. And the Catholic popes had to pick one, and that's what they picked. They could have picked the other one. Doesn't matter. They're both there. They both argue against each other, and that's what makes the New Testament impossible to believe. There are lots more. For instance, how am I to be saved? If that was your question when you wandered into this Presbyterian church, there would be another paradox that they probably wouldn't talk to you too much about, but that would be faith and works versus faith alone. And since it's a Presbyterian church, even though there's two columns of scriptures, again, they're going to take the faith alone side because they've been influenced by Martin Luther. They believe in Martin Luther. They trust, have faith in Martin Luther. So that leaves the other scriptures that argue against faith alone. That leaves them dead. They become like dead scriptures because they can't believe both of them. They conflict. But there they are in the New Testament. So that is the painful truth. They cannot teach you the New Testament because it is too preloaded with paradoxes and contradictions. They cannot believe it in the conventional sense. They have to have faith in it. They have to just trust it. They sort of given up. And they've added that faith and trust to various men who have interpreted for them, who give them some reason to believe that a great amount of it is simply dead. But that's the only way it can be made to work. And very idea that they can teach it to you is preposterous. You can sit there forever and you'll never make sense of it because it doesn't make sense. And that's what I've concluded after 5,000 hours of sitting and listening to this stuff. Anyway, I hope that's been helpful to you. I wish somebody had told me 5,000 hours worth of study ago. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'm Charles.